Welcome to this recording of our second Are You Ready for Recovery webinar, delivered by the Travel Foundation as part of the Big Up Small Business programme, supporting small and medium tourism businesses in Jamaica. The programme is run in partnership with and funded by TUI Care Foundation, and this series of webinars was facilitated with TPDCO. It's a series of 4 webinars with an accompanying toolkit, and this second webinar and toolkit cover health, safety and security considerations for your tourism business. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm Rebecca Armstrong. I'm Destinations Programme Officer at the Travel Foundation in the UK, and my colleague Coral is the Programme Coordinator for Jamaica, obviously based in Jamaica and not Turias. So that's the two of us, and we will be hearing later from Megan Mollison from TPDCO as well, who's presenting for us this morning. So just on to the next slide. Thank you. So today's agenda, obviously we've done some introductions. First of all, we're going to be looking at COVID-19 protocols. So obviously a hugely important part of health, safety and security at the moment. And TPDCO will be taking us through the protocols for Jamaica and giving lots of tips on how your business can comply with those protocols and the reasons behind them and why they're important, obviously, and yeah, how you can put them into practice. We'll then go on to look at some international health and safety standards. Again, this is something that's not only essential for complying with the legislation and meeting requirements, but it really puts you in a great position to do business really with tour operators who will be looking to make sure that your businesses are complying with health and safety requirements, and also reassuring customers. It's always been high on customers' interests, the list of interests, to make sure that that businesses are complying with health and safety, but obviously even more so as we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic, that will be top of customers' minds. So we'll be again going through those international standards and some tips on how your businesses can make sure that you're complying. And then the final topic we'll cover is risk assessment, really linked obviously to health and safety, but taking you through the process of how to identify any particular risks that might be involved in the products and services that you're offering, and how to address those risks, the practical steps you can take to do that. So that's an overview of what we'll be going through today. So going on to the next slide. So yeah, this module is looking at health, safety and security. This is, as I say, module 2 of 4. There is a toolkit which goes alongside this series of webinars. So for each webinar, there's a separate toolkit on the topic that we've covered, and it goes into a lot more detail than we're able to go into today, but it gives you frameworks for how you can implement what we're going through today, how you can implement that in your own businesses. So for everybody who attends today, if you've completed the survey that we sent out beforehand and attended today, we will send you a link to download a copy of the toolkit for today. We'll give the details of the survey in case you've missed it. We'll give those details at the end of the webinar as well. Okay, thank you. So I'm pleased to pass over to our guest presenter today, Megan Mollison from TPDCO, who's going to talk us through the Jamaica COVID-19 protocols and the practical steps that your business needs to take to comply with them. So Coral, if you can stop sharing and then Megan can share her screen, that's great. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Let me just get my screen up. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
Thank you, Megan.
Okay, great. Great. Okay. Good morning, everyone. As Rebecca said, thank you so much, Rebecca, for the introduction. As Rebecca said, I will be sharing the COVID-19 protocols for the tourism industry. And we are the agency that is really responsible for sharing the COVID-19 protocols. We've been doing so since COVID hit us last year. and we continue to upgrade as we go along. So let me just get straight into the presentation. Okay, so safe and resilient tourism has consistently been a foundational element of Jamaica's tourism industry, and we continue with that. And tourists and Jamaicans alike have high expectations for Jamaica as a top tourist destination, and we will continue to ensure that Jamaica is the top tourist destination. The protocols that we will be looking at will be taking into account the health, safety, and well-being of our tourists, our employees, and our communities in seeking to reduce the risk of exposure to COVID-19. And we want to ensure that our visitors or tourists have an enjoyable and relaxing experience and just continue to be safe. The protocols were designed by the relevant agencies, of course, the Ministry of Tourism, Jamaica Tourist Board, Tourism Product Development Company, and the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association. And this was in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Wellness, because all these protocols had to be approved by the Ministry of Health and Wellness before we could go and start the sensitization. The goals and objectives to provide that guidance and enable consistent recovery protocols. So we continue with the protocols and we update as we go along. Support health and economic risk management across the tourism industry and provide that framework to drive that quality assurance implemented protocols, and we continue with regular monitoring. There are 8 key health and safety elements that we have to practice to minimize the COVID-19 risk. And so sanitization stations is of utmost importance. Sanitize, we can't overemphasize. Wearing a face mask and our personal protective equipment, very important. Physical distancing, that's 6 feet apart, that's also very important. And clear, frequent, and consistent messaging. Always have to be sharing that information and just make sure that it's frequently done and it's clear so all will understand. Technology enablement. COVID has set us in a way now that we have to use technology for a lot of things that we're doing. And some of us who were afraid of technology or didn't use it as much, we're now kind of forced to use technology, and we're now enjoying it as well. Real-time monitoring and reporting. Once an incident comes up, we have to monitor and report as it happens. Rapid and clear response, and of course, training. And that's what we do in the sensitization sessions. Now, for COVID-19, each property, each entity must have a safety point person, each organization. And this person is the person who is specifically trained and appointed as the safety point person for COVID-19. So this is a go-to person. If for larger properties, then of course you can have more than one safety point person. And we just refer to them as SPP. These persons conduct regular spot checks throughout the property and observe the COVID-19 protocols. In terms of supplies, things that we need to have, whether we're a large entity or a small entity, alcohol-based hand sanitizer, that's a must. And it should be at least 60% alcohol-based. Your medical grade, your PPE, personal protective equipment, your face shields, your gloves, your masks, your gowns, your aprons, and as it applies to the duties that you have to perform. Your disinfectant and your wipes, those are very important. No contact handheld thermometer, so the one that you don't have to touch the person. And that should be at least 2, one for the entrance where you have your staff entrance. If you have a staff entrance and you have a guest entrance, then of course, you need to have one for each entrance. Each member of staff should have a mask should be given a mask that they would have throughout their shift. There are also disposable gloves. That's also very important that each member of staff should have that. You single-use paper napkins or towels, so we no longer use reusable towels or napkins. We use the single-use ones, so we dispose of it as we use them. The soap dispensers, and of course, hands-free garbage cans with covers. So the step-on bins are very, very critical. They also, you don't have to touch anything. So those are very good to have. Also, the employee well-being is very important. So checking on a regular basis on the health of your employees. And, after 4 to 6 weeks, if they are showing any signs or symptoms, then testing will be appropriate. The tests, if they're tested positive, then that's required to be reported to the Ministry of Health and Wellness. And if there is need for quarantine, then that will be done. The temperature of each employee must be checked upon arrival for their shift. So each employee, also your guest, must be checked upon arrival. For cleaning activities, the cleaners are required to wear their protective apparel while conducting their cleaning duties. So they must wear their masks, their gloves, and their disposable apron. And it's ideal disposable apron because you don't want to transfer any virus or anything that's from one station to the other. So once you clean an area, you dispose. Wash all food and service items, your plates, your cutlery, cups, glasswares, in 80 degrees Celsius temperature or above. So really hot water. Wash all your laundry and reusable items in water at 60 degrees Celsius or above. Handle your waste using gloves or tongs and ensure that they are properly placed in the waste bag and tied and disposed of as quickly as possible. Perform for areas that would have had air condition, you do routine maintenance of the air conditioned vents, wash them as often as possible. And as much as possible, if you cannot use the air condition, that is also recommended. So you have natural air rather than the use of AC. But if you must use air conditioning, maybe the building has the room or the building is so built that you really can't go without air conditioning, then ensure that the vents are properly maintained. For entrances and common areas, it's best to keep the doors open. If you have automatic doors, fine, but I know smaller properties here, we might not have automatic doors, so keep the doors open. If you have an employee that you can have to man the door, that's even great as well. But try to keep the doors open so that less person touching that doorknob. Mark your ground with physical distance line spacing for queues, both inside and outside. So if you have persons queuing, whether inside or outside, ensure that they're physical distancing demarcation so they know exactly to stand 6 feet apart. For smaller properties that you might not necessarily have your markers that you would probably purchase in a store, if you can make your own, or if you can use tape, you can use especially colored tape to mark the 6 feet so persons will know exactly where to stand. Hand sanitizers should be erected at the entrance of the establishment, so persons should sanitize or wash their hands before entering the establishment. And signage should be clear and visible throughout the property. And let me just go back to hand sanitizers, because for me, maybe for some of the properties, you might have a small hand washing area or one of those hand washing, the buckets that you do makeshift. Those are fine as well, as long as it's at the entrance, a person to either wash or sanitize their hands. That's great. Suspected cases should be reported, or any contact with any COVID-19 positive persons. This should be reported in real time through the Ministry of Health, but of course this would go through your safety point person and the necessary process will take place. When you're reporting, also ensure that you include the date, the time, any signs or symptoms observed, the age and the gender of the persons who are showing, and the activities that they were engaged in. So you can go back and check to see who this person, you know, who they were around and what they were doing. So it's easier for you to do that tracing. We also still have to be mindful that we still want to interact with our guests in a friendly and positive way. We want to, you know, share the warmth that we Jamaicans usually have. And we want our visitors to feel relaxed and welcome, just the same, and enjoy the beauty and the culture of Jamaica. But we have to ensure that we do so with the physical distancing observed and wearing of the mask as much as possible. So we still want to ensure we have that interaction with our visitors, but we have to be mindful of the COVID-19 protocols while we're doing our duties. For arrival areas, when your guests or your tourists arrive, supply the front desk area, whether you have a front desk, a concert station, a luggage service, or any other lobby services, there should be a hand sanitizer, or as I said, a hand wash station there as they enter. So your front desk, that area, arrival area should have that. And of course, their temperature should be taken upon arrival. If you have areas that use keys, if it is possible that digital keys can be used, fine, that would be good. But if not, and you're using the traditional keys, then you should have a central drop box that the keys should be placed in so that they can be sanitized before they're passed on to the next user. There are times when guests will leave a key with, you know, at the front desk because they're going off property and they want to leave a key at the front desk and return and collect. Try to do, not to do as much of that, because you want to have less persons handling the keys before you sanitize. So limit that as much as possible. Luggage. Dealing with luggage, when you're dealing with your visitors' luggage, ensure that you wear disposable gloves. Ensure that you, after each use, then of course you would dispose of the gloves. Do not enter your guest room when dropping off luggage. Leave the luggage outside and have the guests bring it to the room. So we're going to take it to the room, we're going to take it to the entrance, but of course, due to COVID-19 protocols, we will take the luggage as close as possible to the entrance, and the guests will take the luggage into their room. If there's any information that you want to share with them regarding the room, you can do so from the outside, or they could be given that information upon check-in. If you have to use a luggage cart, then of course, after each use, you would sanitize your luggage cart, and at the end of your shift, you would sanitize your luggage cart. So your next colleague would have a sanitized luggage cart to start their duties. Lobby area or sitting area or any public area, the furniture should be arranged in to allow for physical distance. So you try to take, if you had a lot of furniture in that area, what you will need to do is to remove some of the furniture and ensure that you have your physical distance 6 feet apart, so you don't have a lot of persons in that space. For the room, removable decorations or room amenities, to, you know, remove any kind of room amenities or decoration that guests would touch, and it probably will be left in the room for another guest. So try to make it as basic as possible. Take out those decorations, things that people will touch and it will be used by another guest as well. Extra pillows, blankets, linens, limit, you know, remove those as well. If the guests need them, then of course they will request, they will ask for them. You can make, you know, just inform them that if they need extra pillows, blankets, just inform you and you will provide those upon request, because you don't want guests to be touching those, and then it's extra work also to be sanitizing, because once you start cleaning that room, you will have to sanitize everything that was in the room, whether if it was used or not. Minibar service, that of course now is suspended. Guests will order what it is that they need and it will be taken to the room. Housekeeping, also you can offer your guests the option to clean. Is it that they want you to clean the room on a daily basis, or do they want to, you know, do a day apart to clean the room? You can have that discussion with your guests, because you want to limit the amount of time that a housekeeper enters that space. So if the guest is fine with, you know, having the housekeeper probably come in every other day, then that's fine. But of course, it's something that you would want to discuss with your guests, and then you can agree on a cleaning schedule for the room. So as less as possible have, you know, visitors, have guests in the same room as the housekeepers, as less as possible. When cleaning the room, wear your single-use mask, your gloves, aprons, closed-toe shoes when you're servicing the room. So ensure that you wear your gloves and your masks and your aprons, because you will not be able to change your uniform for every room that you're cleaning. So it's best to wear the aprons, and preferably the disposable aprons, so you know, those plastic aprons, so you can move from room to room. All right, and of course you change as you go along. Sanitize all surface areas. All areas must be sanitized. The guests is in the room, they touch everything, so sanitize all service areas. Restaurants, if you do operate a restaurant, it's best as possible to have natural ventilation. So if you can have natural ventilation, that's best as possible. Open the doors, open the windows, and just have natural ventilation. You determine the new capacity of the restaurants based on your physical distance guidelines, and the recommendation is 6 feet apart or 70% of your occupancy for that restaurant area. And of course, always post sign listing the new maximum capacity. You know, and the best thing to do is just have the seats, the tables and chairs arranged 6 feet apart. So when your guest comes in, that's where they will sit. Of course, you know, it has to be monitored, because you don't want guests to be removing the furniture to come closer to each other. So someone has to really there to monitor that is observed. For food service and table service, if it is possible, best to utilize digital interface, so persons can, you know, order their items, their food items via their scan the information on their phone, if that is possible. If that's not possible, what you can do, have less of the paper, have less of the paper menu, you have less of that. So what you do, you can have the menus laminated, so that it can be easily wiped off after each person would have used it. Or you can have your menu displayed somewhere at the entrance, so persons can actually see what it is. So if you don't have the digital interface, there are other things that you can do to still minimize the use of paper. And of course, if there's a link, that should be placed at the entrance of the wall. So if you have where persons can scan to get the menu, then of course, as upon entry, they would know that, they would see that, and then they could scan for that. That's if we have that. Tablecloth, it says use single-use tablecloth or change linens after each guest party. That's really a challenge to do that. So the best thing to do is to use tabletops that can be easily wiped, that can be easily cleaned after each use. So it's best to do away with tablecloth and just use tabletops that can be easily wiped after each use. That's the best way to go. Of course, if you have to, sometimes you might have to have tablecloth, because maybe depending on the function that you're having, you might want to go all out and do your nice tablecloth. And so handle used linens using gloves and deposit them into your bin or bag, and you cover them as quickly as possible and transport those to your laundry area. If you do have or offered buffet service, you can still offer your buffet service, but you will have, it will no longer be self-service. It will mean that you will have to have an employee, a food and beverage employee, serving the meal to the guests. You know, so the guests would not be touching the utensils. They would only be placed at the end of the line when the plate has all the food that they require, then that will be handed over to them at that time, but less persons touching the utensils. Always, it's required, or it's recommended that you use your plexiglass shield between the meal and the patron. So rather than having persons actually being so close and exposed to the food on the buffet line, have a plexiglass there between the meal and the patron. Condiments. You remove any condiments that persons would use to help themselves. So if they require extra salt, extra pepper or so, that will be served by the food and beverage employee rather than them touching those condiments. And of course, your employee would be operating by the HACCP standards. If it is that a patron had to touch a food, touch any kind of food or sneeze near food, or, you know, that meal, that food item should be discarded. So what is recommended is having less bulk out there on the line. So should in case you have to discard, it wouldn't be so much of a meal that you would need to discard. So that also is very important. But if you have your plexiglass, then of course, then your sneeze guard, then the food should be pretty safe. For payment, that also in that area where your cashier is, that also should have your plexiglass separating the client from the cashier. And so that barrier is always there. It's recommended also to have a point of sale system. So less cash if as much as possible. So reduce the cash transactions and notify patrons of preference for cashless payments prior to entering, so they may plan accordingly. So you still would accept your cash, but you can also inform them that you'd prefer PO, point of sale transaction. But if that's not available, then they pay by cash, but ensure that whoever handles the cash sanitize their hands as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. If you have a beach area, that also would have a physical distancing for that beach area, because of course you'd want to display your beach chairs and your umbrellas, and so that also has to have that physical distancing. So your chairs, your umbrellas should be placed 6 feet apart. Of course, remember that if there's a party, if there's a group of persons who are traveling together, their chairs would not necessarily have to be 6 feet apart. But once they are not traveling together, they have to be placed 6 feet apart. So even on the beach, they should be apart from each other. And at the end of the use of the umbrellas and the chairs, the beach hut should be sanitized after each guest or each party used that space. For water sporting, if you have any kind of water sporting activities, all the equipment that's used for water sporting activities should be sanitized after. So your life jacket should be sanitized before the next person uses it. Your kayaks, your pedal boats, your banana boats, oars, all of those things that your clients would touch must be sanitized before it's passed on to the next customer or client. Towels. The persons who are handling towels, who are distributing towels to the guests, they should wear a glove. They should be wearing their gloves before, while handling towels, and they limit the guests touching the towels. So the request for towels should come, and then the employee will hand the towels to the guests rather than having the guests touch the towel, because they're not going to just be able to touch theirs, they'll be touching others as well. So limit that, and the employee who is distributing the towel would be wearing a pair of gloves. All areas, all entities should have, an isolation room, and designate a minimum of 1 isolation room on the property to take workers or guests if they show symptoms or have an elevated temperature. So there should be an isolation room for all entities. No matter how small the property is, you should have an area or a space for isolation, should in case any of your employees or your guests are displaying symptoms of COVID-19. So at that point, either an on-site medical professional or the safety point person can perform that initial assessment to determine the appropriate escalation procedure. So your SPP would now do that assessment and determine, whether to contact a medical professional or what is the situation. But that would be handled by your SPP, who will escalate as necessary. For laundry, you label all the laundry bins, and so you have your clean bins, dirty bins, as well as your high-risk COVID-19 contamination. So if you observe any sign or symptom of anyone or of your guests, then those linens would go in the high-risk COVID-19 contamination. So you try not to mix those linen with the others. So you have that as well. And of course, you would handle those, well, all of them you'd handle by wearing your glove and ensure that you sanitize after touching these areas. Clean and disinfect the front loading of the machines regularly throughout the day. So your machine should be sanitized on a regular basis, because remember, when you are putting your laundry in, the towels, the sheets, those sometimes go against the outer part of the machine. So that has to be sanitized after every wash. And at the end of every 2 hours and at the end of every shift, that should be sanitized. And always remember that at the beginning of your shift, sanitize, and at the end of your shift, sanitize your workstation, whatever your workstation is, equipment that you would have used on your duties, sanitize them at the end of your shift. That's always very important. For transportation, if you are into transportation, then of course you limit your carrying capacity to 70%. And this is for groups of strangers. If they are family or they're party together, then the 70% is not necessary, because they will always be together in their same space. But once they are not together, then you have to remember to limit your carrying capacity to 70%. So a five-seater vehicle, that would be like a car or one of those little caravans, those would now carry 3. A 15-seater bus would now carry 10 persons. 29-seaters should carry 20. 35-seaters should carry 25, and a 56-seater to carry 40. All right, and of course, passengers are required to be seated. And of course, they sanitize upon entry to the vehicle as well. They sanitize on entering the vehicle. For visitor information kiosks, and this is for the cruise shipping pier, just to share this information with you as well, so you know what's going on, what we're doing overall. For the cruise shipping pier, design kiosks to have at least 2 windows to cut down on crowding by each window. So instead of having persons queuing up, waiting to get information, have 2 windows so we don't have that amount of bundling in one space. And the plexiglass is very important here as well, with speaking holes, or if intercoms are available, to avoid persons speaking, directly in the other person's faces. So we have to try to minimize that as much as possible. Consider providing Wi-Fi, which would hopefully free of charge, to cut down on persons using tablets or touch screens, because sometimes you have at the kiosk persons using the same tablet to gather information and the touch screen. So rather than having persons touching the same tablet, then you would have the Wi-Fi, so persons can actually just access the information from their personal device. Photographers and videographers, they also need to do their physical distancing from each other and also from the guests. They need to sanitize their equipment at regular intervals throughout the day. You know, at least every 2 hours, sanitize your equipment. Try to distribute photograph or videos digitally if that is possible. If the client has the facility to accept their video or their photograph digitally, then you do that to prevent that physical exchange. So if you can email or send those videos to them so they can just accept it via their telephone or their tablets, that is even better than the physical exchange. But it doesn't mean that you can't have the physical exchange, because if that's the only thing that they can accept at the time, then fine. But we just try to ensure that we minimize that and try to ensure that we sanitize as soon as you do so, if you have. For shopping, for showroom area, for your apparel, try to have the sizes, a single size, a single of each size, so that persons can actually see what the sizes look like, rather than having them try different sizes. So, have that as well. And once they would have identified the size that they want, then you would provide the item for the customer. So rather than having them touching all of these, then you have samples of each, and then they can do that as well. Once a customer touches an item, if they're not purchasing the item, then the apparel should be returned to this showroom or the display area only after it is steam cleaned. That's if the customer had touched it or tried it, especially if they try on the item, steam clean before you return to the showroom or to the display area, and try to do that as much as possible. Oh, okay. I was trying to utilize my time as best as possible. So that's it. Any questions or concerns? I am here, and I'm sure my team members are also on. So if there are any questions or concerns, I'll be willing to assist. I don't know if there was anything in the chat, because I'm not able to see that while I'm presenting. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you very much, Megan. That was really helpful. We're just going to do a quick poll and introduce the new app for a second, and then we will have a question and answer session after that. We had one question so far about making the presentation available, but it's been shared that all the protocols are available on the TPDCO website. So if people want to access them, they can find them on the TPDCO website. We're just following on from what sorry, Megan, did you want to?
Yes, I just wanted to update you that there is, we're updating the protocol as we speak. So in by the next month, or by January 2022, we will be doing another full sensitization of the updated COVID-19 protocols. So while we speak, it's been worked on.
Great,
so, yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, would you mind stopping sharing your screen so that I can then, we're just going to do a quick poll. We used the poll function in the last webinar, and it was really helpful just to get a snapshot of where people's thinking is at the moment. So I'm just going to put up a poll. Just bear with me for 1 second. So there are 2 questions. The first one, we're going to ask you about the top 3 challenges for your business in terms of COVID-19 and the protocols. So there's a list of 10 potential challenges. I'll put them up in a second. So if you can just select 3, I appreciate probably all of them are challenges for different businesses at different times. But if you're able to select really the 3 that you found the most challenging, that would be really helpful, because we're then able to see what the most common challenges are. And then the second question is about what you found most useful so far. And again, there are slightly fewer options there. There are 6 options, but if you could select your top 3 there as well. be coming up now. Okay, so for the first one, I think it's quite an even spread actually across the different challenges, but I think the top three that have come out are the cost of implementing the protocols. I appreciate that's a concern for lots of businesses, you know, the added expense of equipment and I guess staff training and all those things that certainly cost both time and money. Enforcing the protocols among guests and customers, I appreciate that can be a challenge as well, particularly I guess with people that are on holiday and want to relax and, you know, but still need to comply with restrictions. I can appreciate that's a challenge as well. And I think the third one is probably linked to that, really having to make adjustments to your product or service, things like timed entry, reduced numbers, obviously for tours in particular. That's a challenge logistically, but also in terms of you know, the revenue that you're able to get from reduced numbers. So I think those three are, yeah, certainly common challenges. But yeah, there's a real spread across most of them actually. You know, it's clearly all been difficult to do, but I think those three things, the cost and the logistics, really are probably the things that are coming out strongly there. And then for the second question, what have you found most useful? Great to see that the guidance and support from TPDCO has been helpful for the vast majority there. That's come out as top. That's great to see. And I think, as we've just heard, the protocol is really comprehensive and clear. And as Megan said, it's available on the TPDCO website, and the updated version will be coming soon. So, you know, it's a great resource, a really helpful and practical, straightforward resource. So do continue to use that. Also, the guidance and support from the Ministry of Health and Wellness coming out strongly as well. And I think, yeah, the second one actually, out of the three, was the confidence and sense of safety that the protocols provide for customers, staff and tourism partners. Again, linked to the fact that they are clear, and there's lots of information there. You're able to then communicate that to customers in particular who want that reassurance that health and safety is being taken care of and is being taken seriously. So that's really useful to know, I think, in terms of the challenges that you're still facing, knowing what kind of information perhaps and resources we can continue to provide, and what you find most useful. That's really helpful. So thank you. I'll just turn that now. I'm just going to, before we go to the questions and answers, I'm just going to show a short video, if I can share my screen. So this is hot off the press from TPDCO. I will show the video in a second, but TPDCO just yesterday launched the first local tourism app, which features Jamaica Tourist Board licensed and COVID-19 compliant tourism entities. Only those entities are included. So it gives the customers reassurance that all the businesses that are featured on the app are licensed and also COVID compliant. The app is called Explore Jamaica. It currently features 106 tourism entities across all of the 6 resort areas, and across all the different categories. So accommodation, attractions, bike and car rentals, tour operators, places of interest and water sports. And it will include lots of new features, so a travel guide with a cost estimator for guests, a travel blog, so user reactions and comments can be captured. Users, holiday makers, will be able to look at the place where they're staying and find restaurants and shops nearby. So there's a feature that they can search for local places to go. It's in 9 languages, so all different markets will be covered, which is great. And there'll be the possibility of reviews for feedback, so that user engagement can sort of feed back into the process. It's on Google Play at the moment, free of charge, and I'll put the link in the chat in a second, and it's soon going to be on Apple's App Store for those users. So I'm just going to play a short video, which I'm just going to make sure that I've got the sound on, and this is a short introduction video to the new app. Great, thank you. That looks really excellent. It's great to have that resource. I think as tourists start to come back, to have that information available, that they can explore what's on the doorstep of where they're staying and find local businesses, local places to go and eat and visit is really brilliant. So congratulations TPDCO on producing that. It's a really great resource. There may be questions on that as well. I think we'll go to the question and answer session now. There have been a few questions coming in. I know that one of them was answered in the chat. So Layla asked about the protocol on magazines or books in guest rooms and in public spaces, what the protocol was on that. And Anna's advised that printed materials should be removed when possible in public or shared spaces. It's not specifically mentioned in the protocol, but if they are there, then they should be sanitized between guests check in and check out. But it's preferable if they are removed. Yeah, and Glemit's commented it's best to remove them because it's not easy to have those items sanitized. Are there any other questions? I can't see any in the chat at the moment, either about the protocols or about the new app. And obviously TPDCO will be in a better position to respond to those questions than I am, so I will have a look out for them. But Megan and anyone else who can comment,
okay,
please do.
Just so also Rebecca and for everyone else is that with the Explore Jamaica app, then it means that we will also reduce the brochures, the paper brochures, because that information now you could always go to the app and get any information that you would have probably go to a front desk and get a brochure or a brochure that would be shared in the room, you know. So yeah, that helps to minimize the touching of magazines and brochures, even on the cruise ship in Pier or at the front desk of the hotels or the guest houses. Great.
And less paper from a sustainability point of view as well.
Exactly.
So that's
exactly.
Lots of benefits. Great.
Yes. Yeah.
We have 2 participants raising their hands.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Feel free to unmute and ask your question if that's easier. That's great.
Hi, I'm Sophia from Bogue Villa.
Hi, Sophia.
Yeah, I have a question. What's your take on the fogging machine? Do you recommend it? And if you do, is the one with the fog more efficient versus the one with the mist?
That's not my area of expertise, I'm afraid. I don't know if somebody from TPD
I'm hoping that someone from product quality, maybe Anna, would you be able to take that?
Sure. Okay. The fogging machines are highly recommended. They're not a requirement by any stretch of the imagination, because obviously there's a cost factor to them, but it makes your life easier. As in it more quickly sanitizes areas. You can move quickly from one location to the other and get a fulsome job done, especially for furnitures and things. I really can't speak about the difference between the misting and the fogging. That I don't know if one is better than the other or preferred than the other. You'd have to do a little more research really on that one. But as I say, you know, the machines make it quicker and easier, but it's certainly not a requirement for staffing.
Great, thank you, Anna.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There is a question in chat. Someone is asking, can someone have their activities or business listed on the app? Megan or anyone from?
Yeah, I'm sure Marlene is on, but based on the video that we just looked at, it's really for entities that would have been COVID compliant that would be on the listing. Is Marlene on? I'm not sure if she wants to expound on that, but it's really for. Yes, Marlene.
I'm here, Megan. Good morning, everyone. Just to say that the app is for anyone who wishes to participate, and that entity needs to be JTB licensed and COVID compliant. So we have a lot of different categories of tourism entities. We have transportation providers, we have attractions, hotels, travel agencies, different categories of tourism entities. But the long and short of it is that you can get on, anyone can get on to the app, and it's free of cost. But we do ask that you have our JTB license in place and that you're also COVID-19 compliant.
Okay.
So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. There's another question that is asking about spa services. Are there any updates in spa services now available? I think it is in regard to the protocols, specifically use of saunas and offering facials.
Just this week, I'm sorry, Cora, let me just see if I can add something to that. Just this past week, the tourism linkages launched their manual for spa management in Jamaica, and they had their health and wellness conference just this past week. Very, very useful exercise. And I believe many persons would have had those questions answered. So there's a whole new, book, as it were, a whole manual, which speaks to what persons should be doing in the spa situation. And they had a workshop and all of that. So I would suggest that persons make contact with the TEF to access that manual or those materials that would have now been the latest in terms of spas and saunas and those kinds of things in Jamaica from the health and wellness side.
Thanks, Marlene. I imagine that will also address the other question regarding the use of gloves and body treatments at spas.
Yeah.
And then there's another one. Can you please confirm whether there is an iOS version of the Explore Jamaica app in development, or will this only be available for Android voice devices?
Yeah.
I just had a dialogue this morning with the MIS team here. They're hoping for January, early February for the iOS version.
Great. Thank you, Anna. That's great. Donovan, I'm not sure if you were able to put your question in the chat. I'm conscious that we couldn't hear it.
Yeah. Can you hear me a little bit better now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. This is regards to touching up the guest bag. In the program, he mentioned that when the bellman take the bag to the room, they should actually, the guest will take the bag inside the room. What about the tour operators? So we have to still touch the bag, even though we are more spray that we use to take the bags up and around. Can you clarify that for me, please?
Megan, did you?
Okay, I didn't hear all of it, but I think I get a little gist of what he's saying.
Yes,
okay, so for the tour operators, you would still need to touch the bags. It is recommended that you use a pair of gloves if you're touching the bags. For the persons who are taking the bags to the room, it's not that they won't touch the bags. They will touch the bags. They'll be wearing their gloves. But what we want is less persons in the guest room. Less persons in the guest room, and hence you ask them you take it to the room and then they take it from you at the door. But as a tour operator, you will have to touch the bags. So it's recommended that you wear your gloves when you're touching the bags as much as possible. And I know for some areas that the bags are sanitized at the airport before they get to you, the tour operator. That happens as well. But for your safety, it's best to wear your disposable gloves.
Thank you.
I hope that answers it. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. We had another question which Marlene's answered in the chat, but just for others in case they don't see it. So there was a question about whether customers and guests will be able to make bookings and payments through the app. And Marlene's just answered to say not at the moment, but that's in the pipeline. So to be able to make bookings and payments. A question that's just come in, should fully vaccinated guests from different places wear masks around each other while on property? Are you able to comment on that, Megan? So whether fully vaccinated guests from different places need to wear masks when they're around each other while on property.
Yeah, mask is still a requirement. So yes, whether you're vaccinated, fully vaccinated or not, mask is still a requirement.
Okay.
And the physical distancing.
Sure. Thank you. Great. Yeah, and just a follow-up comment, I think we'll finish with this one so that we can, because we've got another presentation coming. So a comment about the sort of booking capability on the app. It'd also be ideal if customers would be able to plan their entire trip, so hotel, transportation, tours, destination, weddings, etc., through the single app, like an online travel agent. I don't know if that's the plan, but that's one of the comments. I don't know, Marlene, if you're able to comment on what people will be able to do sort of in the future through the app, or whether that's something that will be in progress later. That's essentially the question.
Yes, for now, I think they are concentrating on the 4 aspects of travel: dreaming, planning, you know, executing, being there, and then sharing. The booking aspect is something that the MIS department has already started to look at, how we can incorporate that so you have a total experience on the app.
Great. Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you for all your questions. That was really helpful. Great feedback. We're just going to move on now. So Coral is going to present for us, sort of looking beyond just COVID-19, although this obviously is still highly relevant, looking at international standards for health, safety and security. So I will pass over to Coral. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. Hello again, everyone. Hope you're all enjoying the segment so far. So now we're going to be looking at international standards for health, safety and security. And then I'm going to take you through a practical guide to help you to identify, assess and minimize risks, health and safety risks in your own operations. So if we've learned anything at all from COVID-19, and especially from what Megan has just presented, we know now that health and safety is not just about customers, it also includes staff and it also includes local people. And I think, in fact, this pandemic has made it even more unlikely that your customers will ignore health and safety concerns going forward. So even with a focus though on COVID-19 safety, you still need to remember that you need to meet international health and safety standards for the other aspects of health, safety and security. And one of the things you need to bear in mind is that many jurisdictions, including Jamaica, we have standards for health and safety which need to be met, and tour operators also have their own standards because, of course, they have a duty of care to their customers, and they can face severe consequences if anyone that they send on to your premises, if they're harmed while they're on your facility, at your facilities, or on an activity that they sell. So because of this, they're usually very cautious. And one of the things you need to bear in mind is that you need to also be very vigilant and cautious as well. So you need to practice good health, safety and security standards, because this is going to minimize complaints. And of course, it will also minimize bad publicity for your business. And what you need to bear in mind as well is that most times it really isn't about what you think, it's really about what your customers and the tourists think. So it's best for you to look at health and safety from their perspective. So as tourism service providers, you should ensure that you're meeting both the national legislation standards and also that you have a safety management system in place. So let's look at how this would work. In addition to COVID-19 safety, there are 5 other key aspects of health, safety and security that you need to consider. And of course, based on our interviews that we've conducted for this, for the toolkit, which you'll get after this, and for the sessions that we're delivering, or interviews with international tour operators, they advised us that if you contract with them, these are also the areas that they will want you to focus on. And so those are: 1, safety of transportation to and from your facility. You also need to focus on safety of your facilities in general. You need to focus on food hygiene, personal safety and security of your tourists, and of course, human and animal rights. So let's look at transportation to and from your facility. If you provide, or if you intend to provide transportation for your customers, you need to know that there are two main areas of concern. The vehicles themselves, and that's the inside and outside conditions. So you want to make sure that those are clean, that they're well maintained, and that they're meeting safety requirements. The other aspect is the driving practices, of course. Your drivers need to be licensed and they need to be properly trained. One of the things you need to bear in mind is that while it's mainly about safety, you also need to think about comfort. So consider things like whether seat belts on the vehicles work, whether there is availability of air conditioning, whether there is space for hand luggage or for your customers to really travel in a comfortable environment and in a comfortable way. Many of the times we tend to overlook these basic things, but they're very, very important. The second aspect of health and safety is safety of facilities, and facilities cover your buildings, which, though they can be basic, they must be clean and they must be hygienic. And the two most important things that you want to focus on when it comes onto your buildings is fire safety, and that includes things like your escape routes or your firefighting equipment and so on. And then you also need to focus on your bathroom facilities, which again can be rudimentary, but they must be clean and they must meet standards for hygiene. Facilities also cover things like your equipment, and in this case, the quality and the availability of equipment, which are important. This is really about running your activities safely. So the type of activity that you're offering, of course, will determine the safety equipment that is needed. So you'll need to think about things like whether your activity requires helmets, specific protective equipment, life jackets, those kinds of things are what you need to bear in mind. And then the next aspect of facility is transport. So in addition to the transportation that is used to take your customers to and from your facility, you should also focus on transportation which is used as part of your activities. So we're talking about things like your safari jeeps, your ATVs, your ATV bikes, your boats, your jitneys, your bamboo rafts, and so on. The safety of the transportation is really as much too about the type of transport as it is about the person that is in charge of operating that transport. So your driver, your boat captain, your instructor, they all need to meet safety and regulatory standards for operation. And of course, I know you know that the bigger and more dangerous the mode of transportation, the greater your risk level is going to be. And of course, we're going to look at risk assessment later on in the presentation. So for food hygiene, most complaints, of course, you know that from tourists on vacation are usually about food. If they have one minor problem, that could lead to serious, stomach upsets when it comes on to food issues. And this can spoil somebody's entire holiday. So you know too that if tourists get sick, even if it has nothing to do with your facility, they're going to look for somebody to blame. And guess who that somebody is going to be? It's going to be you. They'll automatically assume that something went wrong with your facility or with your excursion or at your accommodation. So you want to ensure that you're making sure to have proper food hygiene. Cleanliness of your water and food is what you really need to be focusing on. So water used for cooking and for washing food, this should be treated, it should be potable. Food should be fresh and it should be of good quality, and it should be properly stored at the correct temperatures, cooked in clean areas, etc. Hygiene is going to be very crucial, no matter how rustic or how basic your offering is. All tour operators and travel agents, including the online travel agents, they'll expect you to be operating legally by meeting your local health and safety laws. But in addition, most tour operators will also carry out their own health and safety check with the properties and with the facilities that they contract. What I have on the screen here is a general idea of the areas that tour operators will usually audit. So they look at your fire safety. When they come in, they look at your fire safety, your fire alarm systems, your extinguishers, your emergency lighting, your training, your fire procedures, and so on, your policies. They'll also audit for water safety. So they look at things like your cleaning processes, your water quality, your water treatment systems, certification for the relevant staff, like your lifeguard certificates and so on. And they'll audit too for food safety. So I know most of you should by now be aware of HACCP procedures. Some tour operator audits include checking to ensure that you are following procedures for food safety. So they look at things like your food storage, again, your temperature checks and your logs, and also other general food safety procedures. And of course, now with COVID-19, they'll also include checks for COVID-19 health and safety measures and protocols. One of the things you need to bear in mind is that you need to keep proper maintenance records as well, because for every area that they audit, most tour operators will ask to see that you have documents in place relating to your service and your maintenance records, your training records, and your documented policies and procedures. So looking at the next aspect of health, safety, and security is personal safety of the tourists or your customers. Although crimes against tourists in Jamaica is minuscule, it is important for you to ensure that your customers are not the victims of any criminal activities and that they feel safe at all times while they're on your premises or at your excursions. And take into consideration things like the crime levels in or near your facility. Think about providing your customers with safety information and tips that will help them when they're on and off your property. You know what your local environment is like. You know that best. You can provide information on things like places to avoid, if there are any, precautions to take when they're in the community or in the local area, and consider things also like the mobile phone reception, the weather, the time of your tours or your activities, and how these will affect the safety of your customers. If, for instance, let us say in terms of weather, if your facility or your tours are located in an area that gets flooded when it rains, you want to make sure you're putting measures and contingency plans in place to address any of these likelihoods. Now, a lot of these things are basic again, which we sometimes overlook because it's so basic we don't think about it, but it's important for you to think about every single aspect of your customer journey and put those measures in place to avoid any unnecessary events. In terms of hassle, you want to consider the level of hassle or harassment that takes place in or near your business. We are very familiar with that kind of activity in Jamaica. How can you make the experience less unpleasant for your customers? How is it that you can manage their expectations where that is concerned? And one other very important aspect of personal safety and security is medical care. So think about organizing medical care and think about how to get access to medical care in cases of emergencies, especially if your facility or your activities are located in a remote area. You should have clear procedures in place for dealing with medical incidents and medical emergencies. And it's also a very good practice for you to maintain up-to-date list of contact details for the emergency services personnel which are available in your area. And the final aspect of health, safety, and security is human and animal rights. In terms of human rights, you want to consider the rights of children, especially as that regards forced labor. We know that European and particularly UK tour operators are particularly concerned with children's rights. So we want to make sure you're focused on that and you're not having school-age children working in your facility, especially during school hours. So this can be very alarming to some tourists. Another key area of concern is animal welfare. So many tourists, and again, European and British tourists are usually very uncompromising about animal welfare. And they will usually complain to their tour operators if they see something they don't like. So if your activities involve animals, either as a means of transport, like in horseback riding, or if it includes animals as part of the activities, like feeding the dolphins, you should really take care to ensure that the best possible standards regarding the health and well-being of those animals are met. So what happens if, after you put in all your good health and safety practices and procedures, you still have something going wrong? Well, the advice is that you need to obtain public liability insurance. Usually the insurance company of a tour operator will not insure an activity if it does not meet certain requirements. And most tour operators are going to expect you as the provider or the supplier to have public liability insurance in place to cover your business in case of accidents or in case of claims by customers. And you need to note too that where your customers are asked to sign a waiver or a disclaimer, this may not necessarily absolve you of all your legal obligations. In fact, in some jurisdictions, the court may still find your company responsible if negligence can be proven. The quote that I have on the screen here is from an article I came across in the Jamaica Observer recently, which was written by a contract lawyer. And he says that if waivers are to be used, the contracting parties should seek legal advice to ensure that they are sufficiently air and watertight. So just not as simple as having something for your customers to sign. You really need to make sure that whatever waivers you're putting in place, that they're air and watertight. Okay, so now we're gonna look at risk management. And for those of you who market through tour operators and through, ground agents and so on, it is critical that you can demonstrate that you have a risk management system in place. But even if you do not market through, tour operators or ground agents and you sell directly, it is still a good system for you to have to really protect tourists against unnecessary dangers and to really limit your exposure. So we've simplified the process here a little bit and have created some practical tools that we think you can use to help you understand and implement a risk management process. The process itself is very straightforward. So the first step you're going to do is to identify the risk. And you're going to identify the risk throughout the entire customer journey. The key thing to do is for you to put yourself in the shoes of a tourist and to really not see things from your own perspective. So you'll need to conduct risk assessments for the buildings, for the activities, and for each of the 5 aspects of health and safety I mentioned previously, including now you need to also do a risk assessment for COVID-19 safety. The second step is to assess and grade the risk. And this is a little bit more complex, so we're going to look at that shortly. The third step is to minimize or to remove the risk. And again, minimizing and removing the risk can be done in a number of ways, which we're going to explore in another slide shortly. And then the final step is to monitor. You need to remember risk assessment is an ongoing process. And so monitoring should be done to ensure that the precautions that you're taking are effective and that the risk levels remain low. So this is step 2 I mentioned earlier. This is a visual aid that is supposed to help you to understand how to grade your risks. So pretty much dangers are graded as high, as medium, or low, according to how likely they are to happen and also the level of injury that they will generate. So for instance, if the risk is very likely to occur and will cause serious harm, then that risk would be graded as high. Let us say, for example, you have a hiking activity which takes place along some really very rugged terrain, and let's say the ground is uneven. If you think about it, that presents a risk that a customer could fall and injure him or herself while they're on your tour. So if you think about how likely this is going to happen, let's say it's quite likely to happen, right? Because if you consider, when you consider the level of harm, you could also say that the level of harm could be serious. So let's say if you consider the level of harm, you're looking at whether it's going to be a serious level of harm, a moderate level of harm, or a minor level of harm. So let's say it's moderate. Let us say if somebody falls, they're going to break their leg. So it's moderate. So moderate level of harm, if the incident is quite likely to occur, it means that the risk would be rated as medium. Hoping you understand that. If it sounds a little bit too complicated, don't worry. We're going to be providing a toolkit for you at the end of the session. And this table is also going to be in that toolkit. So it will help you to guide you as you do your own risk assessment exercises. All right, so looking back at step 3, having identified the risks and having graded the risks, the next stage is to take precautions to avoid and reduce the risks. And the options for avoiding and reducing the risks are: 1, you could either remove the risk completely, or you could provide equipment, or you could train your employees. You could brief your customers about what to expect so that they know what to do. You could use signage as well, or you could limit your group sizes so you have smaller group sizes and a higher ratio of staff to customers. So if we go back to the hiking tour example, think about what precautions you could take. You could remove the experience completely, but not in all cases is this an option. If the activity is part of an authentic experience, and if it is an added value to your tour, that removing it completely may not be an option. So you think of the next options of reducing the risks. How could you do that? Well, you could provide equipment. Let us say you provide walking sticks, so your customers can use that to assist them as they go along the tour. Or you could put in some kind of support or railing that they can hold on to that will help them as well. Or you could find ways, if the pathway is treacherous, say it has stones and obstacles, you could remove those obstacles. You could also train your staff or your tour guide to guide your customers carefully along the way. And they could also brief the customers. And if you have options, you could give them those options as well as to alternate routes that they could take. You could also put in signage. So those are the ways in which you can reduce the risks that are presented in your activities. One of the things to consider is that when you're looking at the precautions, the aim is not going to be so that you put in a measure that is going to dilute the authenticity or the activity that you're offering. If the activity that you're offering is risky, but if it is essential to the experience, to the authentic experience, or if it's essential to the, it's an extra added value that you're providing, you may not be able to really remove it. But you just need to think about what ways, what you can put in place to ensure the safety of your customers, because this is paramount. And so thinking about, maintaining your spirit of adventure is all well and good, but think about how you can ensure that that is done in a very safe way. And one of the things to note is that activities that you don't consider dangerous could easily present risks. So you want to put yourself in the shoes of your customers. And the important thing is that, bear in mind at the back of your mind that the important thing is that your customers are kept safe at all times. So we're going to move on to another activity, but before we do so, I just want to remind you about Sam's Mango Farm, the case study that we introduced last week, because this next activity is going to be based on that case study. So just going through quickly what that case study is about. Sam has a mango farm in the Jamaican countryside near to the coast. He wants to diversify to sell accommodations, some rustic cabins and tree houses. And he also wants to create a tourist attraction so that he can make a living outside of the mango season. Now, Sam has designed a nice little tour of the farm where he plans to give interesting facts about mangoes, about how they're farmed, and about his family history. Sam also plans to offer short guided walks in the shaded wooded area behind his farm and offer bicycles for guests to ride in the surrounding area. Now, Sam's wife, Shelly, will provide cooking lessons in an outdoor kitchen, and his brother, Leroy, so it's a family business, Leroy has a glass bottom boat moored on the beach nearby, and he has offered to take guests on snorkeling excursions. Now that tourists are coming back to Jamaica, Sam plans to approach a local tour operator, but he needs to look at his health and safety risks. So in our next activity, we're going to help Sam look at his health and safety risks. We're going to now have a breakout room activity. Each of you is assigned to a group, and each group will focus on one activity or one facility on Sam's Mango Farm. So groups 1 and 6, you're going to be looking at the farm tour. Groups 2 and 7 will be looking at the accommodations, that's the rustic cabins and the tree houses. Groups 3 and 8 will be looking at the bicycle rides. Groups 4 and 9 will be looking at the cooking lessons. And group 5, you will be looking at the glass bottom boat snorkeling excursion. In your groups, you're going to identify the risks associated with the activity that you're assigned or the facility, and you're going to discuss how you would minimize the risks. One of the things to remember in identifying the risks, you need to consider the 5 aspects of health, safety, and security that I just went through, and also include COVID-19 safety in that.
We've just got a few minutes now for any questions, either relating back to the COVID-19 protocols or to Coral's presentation and the risk assessment process. We had one question that was in the chat from before, so I thought I'll read that now. It's a question about relating to the COVID-19 protocols. What happens if a guest is on a tour and refuses to wear a mask? What should you do? I guess there's 2 different scenarios there. It might be that somebody's refusing to wear a mask to get on the tour, or it might be that while they're actually during the tour, some way along the way they refuse to wear a mask. Megan, I don't know if you've got any thoughts or specific guidance on that.
Well, for the protocol, it says that, you know, masks are required. So the first thing is that this would be outlined to the persons before doing the tour. There's a signage there to remind you that to continue to wear your mask. The employees will, you know, continue to remind you to wear your mask. If persons refuse to wear their mask before doing a tour, then they could be asked not to join the tour, because that's the policy. You came, that's the policy. If it is that they're on the tour, have started the tour, and they've removed their mask, well, you can't literally force the mask onto the person. So you just try to ensure that others are wearing their mask then, and you keep reminding them. But if this person is really defiant, we can't stop the tour at this point. So you just have to ensure that others are wearing their mask. You as the guide wearing your mask, and you know, you try to see as best as possible if you could encourage a person to wear their mask. Yeah, that's the most I could say right now.
Great, thank you, Megan. That's really helpful. Any other questions at this point? Perhaps on the international health and safety standards, tour operator expectations, or the risk assessment? Any questions or comments? I appreciate it's a lot to take in the session as well. And at the end of the session, we will share the email address that if you do have any follow-up questions, as you perhaps use the toolkit to think about your own businesses, please do email us. We're more than happy to help with any questions after the session. But if you do have any now, we've got a few minutes. Oh, hi, Gina.
Hi, hello everyone. Happy Thanksgiving, just to add that.
Oh, of course, happy Thanksgiving.
What was I going to ask? Would the presentation be shared with us at the end of, I'm not sure if you had made mention of it before, just asking again if the presentation will be shared with us, just in case we want to go over anything on our own.
I think in terms of the COVID-19 protocols, that's the information that's on the TPDCO website. We can share the presentation for this session. However, to be honest, it's all in the toolkit, and probably easier to use the toolkit because you've got it all set out there, and sort of easier to have it in that one place in a PDF copy. So whilst we can share it, I think probably, to be honest, the toolkit is probably more helpful. Okay. You've got it written out there, you know, in a sort of more readable form than just looking at the slides.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Just got a question coming on the chat. For private tours, should participants be forced to wear a mask as well, seeing that they are traveling together? So assuming that's a sort of family group or a bubble, or people traveling together, do they still need to wear a mask?
We would still encourage them to wear a mask, but if they're in a bubble, then, you know, that's a little different, but ensure that the tour guides or the other persons who are not in the group, they're wearing their masks. Mm-hmm. You know, you still encourage it, but ensure that the persons who are not in that group, they should be wearing their mask.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Can't see any more questions at the moment, so I think Coral is just going to wrap up with a few key takeaways from today before we finish.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. Thanks, everyone. So before we end, I just want to leave you with some key takeaways from today's session. The first one is that health and safety is top priority for tourists and for tour operators. So now that you understand that health, safety, and security are important to meeting regulatory requirements and to attracting tour operators, as well as to maintaining a high quality reputation with your customers, it is recommended that you put in place an effective health and safety planning and monitoring process. Now, the second takeaway is that you need to take health and safety seriously. You need to ensure that you are maintaining the highest levels of safety for the experiences and for the activities that you have on offer for your customers. Remember that safety also covers your buildings, your facilities, your transportation, your equipment, and that they must meet both our local laws here in Jamaica, particularly your COVID-19 protocols, as well as tour operator requirements for customer safety. The third takeaway is that public liability insurance and risk assessment are vital. You need to have these in place, but you are also well advised to ensure that you're carrying out periodic risk assessments and that you're putting measures in place to mitigate or to eliminate any other risks that you have identified. And hopefully the exercise that we did in the breakout room session was helpful in helping you to understand how to do that. And finally, the last takeaway I want to leave you with is that you need to make sure that you are complying with COVID-19 protocols. The COVID-19 pandemic has served to really heighten customers' expectations of health and safety protocols. And I think that as a legacy of the pandemic, hygiene and cleaning plans, capacity limits, health checks, and all of those things will continue to be key considerations for the foreseeable future. So as tourism businesses, it is very important that you are making an effort to communicate to your customers the measures that you have in place and what is expected of them to comply and to reduce the risks of transmitting the virus. And I think now TPDCO has even made it easier for you to communicate with your customers through this newly launched Explore Jamaica app. So that's it from us today. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for participating in the poll and for joining us today. The next webinar that we're going to be doing will take place next week, Thursday, on 2nd December at 10 a.m. That's a webinar, as Rebecca mentioned earlier. We'll be looking at how to price your product and how the pandemic has affected pricing. Thank you. Stay safe and see you next week.